Deadly wildfires spreading across Southern California have left thousands of people without homes. At least one of those fires could have been started on purpose. LAPD even investigating a homeless man for arson. Here's everything we know about the fires right now. At least 10 people have died as a result of these wildfires. But we won't have an official death toll for quite a while because it's still unsafe for first responders to go into some of these burn zones. Tens of thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes and rush to safety, and at least 10,000 buildings have been burnt to the ground, including the homes of some big-name celebrities like Paris Hilton or Adam Brody. At the time of this recording, the fires are ongoing across the Los Angeles area, and there are actually multiple fires, pushing up dangerously close to LA landmarks like the Hollywood sign or Sunset Boulevard. The biggest fire is the Palisades fire. It's between Malibu and Pacific Palisades, even pushing up against Santa Monica. There's also the Eaton fire from the Pasadena area into the Angeles National Forest. The Hearst fire is north of the San Fernando Valley, and the Lydia fire is in the Antelope Valley area. And then there's the Kenneth Fire. And this is the fire that could have been started on purpose in an act of arson. His name wasn't released, but we did learn that the man was homeless and in his 30s. Neighbors in the Woodland Hills area reported the man started the fire about 4:30 Thursday evening. They called 911 right away, and as they were waiting for police to arrive, a bunch of the neighbors came and surrounded the man to make sure he couldn't run off. It was basically a giant citizen's arrest. Within 20 minutes, he was taken into custody. Early on, there were reports that the man started the fire with a propane tank or a flamethrower, and as of yesterday, an arson investigation is underway. So this story, new updates coming out almost by the second, and it's just devastating news one after another. But to talk about it a little bit more in depth, we're going to bring in former CIA officer and FBI agent Tracy Walder. And Tracy, right from the jump, you're from Southern California, and your family has been affected by all this, right?
Yes, I'm from Southern California. I was born in LA County, and then when I was about 7, my parents moved to Orange County. But unfortunately, my first cousins live in the Palisades.
What has it been like for them? Have they had to evacuate their homes, I'm assuming?
Yes, so they lost their home, which I mean, the reality is pretty much everyone in the Palisades lost their home. But I think even more importantly is that their children all lost their schools. And so, the reality is even if you try to rebuild there, right, there's no infrastructure to help the rest of the population. And so it will be very interesting to see how and if the Palisades comes back, because I think the loss of infrastructure isn't being, talked about as much.
I want to thank Upside for sponsoring today's Law&Crime YouTube takeover. Upside is a free app that gets you real cash back on gas, groceries, and at restaurants. It's super easy to use too. You just claim an offer in the app, pay as usual with your card, and then get cash back. And this is actually real cash back too. You can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, 7-Eleven, or even Chipotle. So to find how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCTakeover to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. And I feel like it's an overwhelming amount of destruction here because we have multiple wildfires going on at once. It's something I don't think I've ever seen before. I know you probably have followed California wildfire history better than I have. Have you ever seen anything to this magnitude?
No, I mean, I'm 46 years old and my family still is in Orange County as well. And, even in Orange County, we would get fires a lot in Laguna Canyon, where I'm from, and all of that, but nothing like this. And what I think is even more difficult is, so my best friend was evacuated because of that Runyon Canyon fire. She lives kind of right there. And so she went to her parents' house in Calabasas only to be evacuated because of the Kenneth Fire that was in Calabasas and Woodland Hills, and then went south, but then they extended the Palisades evacuations into sort of the Santa Monica area. So the reality is there's almost nowhere to go safely in Orange County. And so that's why, a lot of folks are considering fleeing down into Orange County and those other areas. That's what I've never seen before. Certainly, as you mentioned, we get fires, we just do, but nothing like this where there's nowhere safe necessarily to evacuate to.
That sounds like a true nightmare, going one place to the next, and these fires just keep popping up. And you brought up the Kenneth Fire, which is a huge one I want to talk about today because we've gotten word that it was actually started because of arson. Allegedly, this homeless man started it on purpose. How does an investigation like this even begin?
First of all, I want to say that it's being reported that they actually caught him within 20 minutes of this breaking out, which is very interesting to me. I think one of the reasons that it was raised initially that this may be arson is just for those people who may be familiar with this area. I think a lot of us thought this fire was intentional simply because the embers wouldn't have gone in that direction. Some of the other ones are explainable based on winds and embers and the direction and all of that. But this one, I think, really immediately jumped out to investigators as being potentially arson. And so I think that right there, they were already on the lookout. But then I also think too, you really have citizens and neighbors who have basically jumped into action, right? And caught this individual in what's being shown as in video as basically red-handed. So I do believe that investigators and firefighters already suspected initially that this fire was arson based on the burn pattern, based on how it started, and based on the location of where it started.
You talked about the neighbors, and I want to bring them up too, because this is almost an incredible story. The fact that they found this guy 20 minutes or so after he allegedly started this fire, which is a huge, quick response. And according to some of the neighbors who were there, they all kind of band together and surrounded him. It kind of made me think of like the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, also in the LA area, where people banded together to get this suspect. I mean, what do you make of all of that? Are these people going to be talking with FBI or investigators?
I mean, this is community policing, right? At its finest. That's exactly what's going on there. They saw something suspicious, and obviously they did something about it. Not to mention, he also had incendiary devices in his hand, basically a Molotov cocktail, if you will. And so the fact that they got him without violent incident, quite frankly, and were able to hold him there. Yes, they are all now obviously witnesses to this and will absolutely be questioned by LAPD, and the FBI. There's no question because now they're involved in this investigation.
The Molotov cocktail, that is just crazy to me. Some of the articles say things like flamethrower, which is something I've never seen before. I mean, I'm reading New York Times articles that mention a flamethrower that this guy apparently used. It's just crazy. But then when we're thinking about evidence, the fact that we have fire, a lot of it is burned, does that make things more complicated?
It does make things more complicated, but if you look at, a lot of his arrest video, they have the flamethrower, on the hood of the police car. So it's very obvious. And you see him in the video with it in his hands. Yes, obviously in a fire, evidence is burned. Fingerprints are burned. Biological forensic evidence is not necessarily usable. However, one thing I think they may have going for them than they didn't have 10, even 20 years ago is video. And I do think a lot of people forget this. It's a densely populated area. Yes, parts of Calabasas are more open, but I believe he was arrested in Woodland Hills, which is pretty densely populated. It's actually where I was born. And so I think there, what they're going to have are Ring doorbell cameras. They're going to know directionality in terms of where he came from. They're going to know where this fire started. The fire department will be able to tell that after the investigation. And my hope is that they will be able to basically piece together his movements through digital evidence. And then also if he had a cell phone on him as well, putting him from a geolocational standpoint in that location will also be helpful.
These modern day technologies that we have, I feel like you and I talk about them every single time we have an interview. And it's really cool that we have them. These phones and, like you said, Ring doorbell camera, that is just next level. So I think that's really going to be important. I'm wondering about motive too. I know that investigators, after they took him into custody, would of course want to talk to him. Obviously, it's up to him whether he wants to talk or get a lawyer, whatever it may be. But are they going to be searching for a motive?
I think they will. I mean, a lot of fires, unfortunately, especially, for my time living in California, my family still being there, a lot of these are intentionally set. In this case, maybe it's a copycat situation. I don't know. Maybe this is an individual that was upset. This is an area where there's a lot of celebrities, and a lot of wealth concentrated into a location. Maybe that was a vendetta. Maybe this is someone who just loved fire. I don't know necessarily the answer to that question. And I think it's probably all over the board. But I do think that unfortunately, one of the things that LAFD and LAPD are really having to grapple with is copycats. I mean, look, even yesterday they were grappling with people putting drones up in the air illegally and running into the fire suppression aircraft. And so, I really think, unfortunately, this is something that they're having to grapple with.
And I know this isn't something traditionally maybe that the FBI would get involved in because it would be the fire department and the police department in LA. But because of the magnitude of everything, do you think FBI or CIA or any larger unit would help with all of this?
Yeah, this was the FBI office I actually worked at, to be totally honest with you, is the LA field office. And so, yes, I believe this may not be a federal investigation yet. I don't know how they're going to ultimately classify it, but I do think that their resources are absolutely being used because the reality is LAPD and LAFD are very spread thin right now. There's no question that they are spread very, very thin. And in situations like that, where resources are just too far spread, that is when they will bring in the FBI, especially if they're under a time crunch. A lot of what the FBI can do in terms of geolocating cell phone data and all of that, they can do so much more quickly. And so this may not be an investigation where the FBI is the lead on it per se, but in my opinion, there is no question they have already been brought in terms of resources.
That's so helpful because, as you pointed out, LAPD, LAFD being spread so thin, and this is wild the amount of buildings that have been burned down and people who no longer have homes. So I'm really glad that we have them helping. Do you think those are some of the next steps of the investigation, looking for others?
I do think that there could be more people involved. I do think that some of these fires may have been intentionally set. In terms of the spreading and all of that, like they were dealing with 100+ mile per hour winds and couldn't get aircraft up there. We know that is a known factor here, but we don't know, right, how a lot of these started. A lot of information hasn't necessarily been given on that because I think the fire department might not know, right, at this point in time. And so I would be interested to see how those investigations play out. But in all honesty, I'm not sure that they have time to investigate that right now because these fires are still burning and they have to put them out. And that's really issue number one. Then they'll go back and look at point of origin and how these all started.
You're right. The main priority is getting people out, make sure they're safe, putting out the fires. So you're right. It's kind of crazy that we have these two major things going on at once because we will want information from the investigation eventually. Whenever that does happen, do you have any ideas for like a timeline? I know we don't know for sure when these fires could be put out, but what would you guess?
I think the answer to that question is it depends. It depends if the fire department deems them as criminal. And if that's the case, then obviously LAPD is going to be brought in. Clearly, the fire department does have their own forensic team who goes through, looks at point of origin, and looks at how they started. But I think we could be looking at probably weeks to a month in terms of this situation because these fires are so out of control. And even today, Santa Ana winds are supposed to start back up. And so in my opinion, I don't necessarily see an answer to that soon, but I do think that's exactly why the FBI has been brought in.
It seems like it's just one thing after another for the Los Angeles, Southern California community that they're dealing with. You brought up the winds, so really still a lot going on. And as you said, we have a lengthy timeline ahead of us. But if we're jumping to that, just guessing, do you have any ideas based on your experience what any sort of charges could be in all of this? I mean, arson, but you even mentioned it could be federal.
Yeah, I mean, obviously arson is the most basic charge, right, that we're looking at here. But people died as a result of this. I believe the death toll, at least right now, at the time of this interview, is about 10. So people died as a result of this. And so I do wonder if there could be, criminal murder charges as well as a result of this, which would obviously add on top of the arson charge. They're not just going to be charged with one thing here, right? At least I don't see that happening. I see multiple charges that we're looking at. Yes, there could be federal charges. If you look at some of the property that has been destroyed, like Will Rogers State Beach, some of those were protected by the state. So they were state homes, right, or state places. And so at that point, the federal government could come in and levy charges. My gut says that may not happen. I think LA has the capability to probably pursue those charges, but certainly I've been wrong before.
Here on Law&Crime, we basically focus on crime. I mean, it's literally in our name. So that's one of the reasons we're talking about this today. But what is paramount is everyone being safe there and evacuating. And I know before the interview, you and I had talked a bit about resources or what people could do. Do you have anything you want to share?
Well, the first thing I actually want to share is that everyone in this area, in my opinion, needs to have a go bag packed in some way, shape, or form. I know it's not a pleasant thing to think about, but I think a lot of people didn't imagine this happening to them. And so when they left, they packed for maybe a day. I think we need to have a go bag for 7 days. And I think that people need to round up things that are important to them and have those packed already. We have the gift of time right now, and that some people don't have to get out of their homes right now. So I think that's the first thing that we need to talk about. Also, the LA Fire Department does have a foundation that is set up to deliver more funds to them and more funds to victims. Also, the LA Humane Society as well is working with displaced animals.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up the animals too, because that's what I would be thinking of. My dog, making sure my family's safe too, and he's part of the family. Our hearts go out to all of the people involved in all of this, and we're hoping for a quick resolution. I know that's a pipe dream at this point, but hoping for some sort of solace for the people in Southern California. Tracy, best of luck to you and your family, and thank you for coming on and breaking it all down for us.
Thank you for having me, Sierra.
On Friday, LAPD officials announced that the man they originally thought was involved in the arson will not be charged. Police investigated the case and even spoke with this suspect and eventually determined there wasn't enough evidence or probable cause to arrest him. From here, the Kenneth Fire and all the others in the area are still under investigation. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.